Mic check 1 2 3 4 5. Chelsea, this is for you. Mic check 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Did you guys see the email? Mic check. Sounds good.
Your shooting was louder than the thing, by the way.
On the bright side, it does give you a chance to go over that piece. I said on the bright side, it gives you a chance to go over that piece, right? Yeah. Get back to me if I can.
We have a live 4 to 5, we have a live news cast, so we're just gonna cut it. So that's why I was looking at 4 or 5 o'clock. So just basically. Thursday, it's still fine.
Yeah, and you can just put it up now, we can write that down. Yeah, and just, and you can get, he's gonna, they want to know. So, we just get everything up there.
Hey, y'all, if you.
Oh, that,
I
I'm
didn't mean
sorry.
you.
I was just gonna say whoever moved. I appreciate it when people move stuff for me, but, we're gonna put this, the picture, the aerial view, up here. So we're just gonna move this over a little bit to where it was.
Okay, sorry. They're gonna put the image behind the podium, but.
That was nice of them to do it that way.
Does he want it right now? Yeah. Just to make sure. I just said,
Everything's set up, I take it. I'm Dan May. I'm District Attorney for the 4th Judicial District. With me today is Margaret Veller. She's one of our Chief Deputy District Attorneys. She's also in charge of our homicide unit. On any case, we have a Deputy DA who's on call 24 hours a day for any homicide or officer-involved shooting. Margaret was on call at that time, was at the scene, and will also be here to answer any questions that you have. She's the one in our office who is at the scene that night and well into the night. That she has read all the reports, reviewed all of the tapes in this case in leading to our decision. I believe all of the media have an official copy of our report. I do want to say this is a horrible tragedy that struck our community. Our hearts and the community's hearts have gone out to Micah Flick and his family, to Thomas Villanueva and his family, to Officer Marcus Yanis, and to Scott Stone. But in the end, we also have to issue a report out to the public on what happened in this case, and we do that in a very objective manner. I can tell you that our role is a fairly narrow one in this. Quite frankly, our role in the District Attorney's Office is to review whether the officers' actions were justified or whether the charges should be brought against the officers in the use of their firearms in this case. So as we review it, that is the perspective we use. We don't go into necessarily the tactics that may be used by the agency or things like that. We are very much, by law, reviewing were the officers justified in using deadly force in this case. As you know by the report that's been given out to the public at this point, we have determined that the officers were justified in this case in using deadly force in stopping the suspect in this case who shot Mr. Villanueva and shot Micah Flick, and that they were all three justified in firing their weapons. We did give you a drawing, and I'm going to walk you through the drawing a little bit. I think it helps explain some of our conclusions that we drew in this case. The drawing that we've handed out is kind of frozen in a moment of time. It has been given out to the media. You can see that there's a legend on it. If you look at this drawing, it is the parking lot over at the apartments where this occurred. This is a Google map picture. It is not one that was taken on the night. It is just a general Google map. We have placed in it certain items that are important for the decision making that we made in this case. What we have done is that the blue circles that you see there are the officers. You will see their initials on each position where they were, and on the legend you can see their actual names. That is the positions they were in at the moment they attempt to make the arrest of Mr. Zetina. So that is the instant that they are about to grab him, literally, to make the arrest. That's what that depicts. The red triangle is Mr. Zetina. That represents where he was again at the time they were going to make the arrest. You see some blue triangles over in this area. Those are spent shell casings from the police officers' weapons. So those are police officers' shell casings in that area. The red triangles represent the shell casings from Mr. Zetina, where they were found in the parking lot. The yellow triangle in the middle is his gun. After it was kicked out of his hand, that was where the gun came to rest, and that was where the gun was found. Thomas Villanueva is the green circle, the TV that you see over there. Over there you see there's a red triangle. That is not a shell casing. That is a bullet. That is a spent bullet that we believe has passed through Mr. Villanueva. It is a 9mm. It has been absolutely identified by ballistics as coming from Mr. Zetina's gun. On that particular 9mm bullet is also the DNA of Mr. Villanueva. We believe that is the bullet that he is shot with and that he is shot by Mr. Zetina in this case. Our general conclusion, as I said, first of all, we found the officers were justified in using deadly force in stopping anybody else from being shot or killed in this circumstance. Second, we have determined that Mr. Villanueva was shot by Mr. Zetina, and that is based on the fact that the type ammunition Mr. Zetina was using was 9mm, fully jacketed, which is meant to go through the body. This particular bullet has gone through his body. It is found very near him, and it has his DNA on it. We have also determined that Micah Flick was also shot by Mr. Zetina. That particular bullet was never found, but we found several circumstances that we felt demonstrated that that bullet did not come from friendly fire. That bullet did come from Mr. Zetina. One is a close range shot. The coroner has indicated that it is close range, which means it was within inches. The gun was within inches of shooting Micah Flick. None of the officers were in that area at the time he went down, so it is not possible for them to be within inches when that shot is fired. When Micah Flick goes down, the only person who had shot at that point was Mr. Zetina. No officers had fired up to that point. When we say close range, you can see stippling, you can actually see the smoke from the gun itself. Also the angle that it came in through his chest, not his back, again would demonstrate an angle being close. Mr. Zetina's gun does have blood on it. The DNA comes back to Micah Flick, which is also important in our analysis. Quite frankly, the fact that it is a through and through shot is important into our analysis because the officers were all using hollow point weapons. Hollow point bullets are meant to stop in the target. This was a through and through shot, which was consistent with the 9mm ammunition that Mr. Zetina was shooting. With that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
How many shots total were fired by Mr. Zetina, as well as how many total shots were fired by law enforcement?
You have the total?
So Manuel Zetina shot at least 6 times because 6 of his shell casings were found in the parking lot. His gun held a total of 9 and it was empty when it was recovered. So we don't know how many bullets were in his gun to start off with. Law enforcement total shots fired are either, let me count.
No problem.
Either 7 or 8.
I can explain when she says that. What we find very routinely, and I've been doing this for over 35 years, when you go out to a crime scene, you don't necessarily find all the shell casings. Sometimes they're just hidden in the grass. Quite frankly, though, you find they can be kicked. They can get stuck in, we have emergency personnel coming in, you have fire, you have ambulance trying to save lives. We found they can get stuck in their boots or their, quite frankly, the tire tracks from the ambulance and can be driven away. So that's why she says we know how many of his rounds, Mr. Zetina's empty rounds are there. It is possible that there could have been more that are no longer on the scene for various reasons. On Officer Yanez, he counts how many bullets he puts in his gun. By his count, he believes, by going by his count, he would have fired 5 times. By his shell casings, we find 4 shell casings. So that's why on the officer side, it could be that he's inaccurate on the number of bullets he had loaded into his gun, or it could be that the shell casing, one of his shell casings was also not found at the scene.
Did the suspect know that the deputies approaching him were law enforcement officers?
We don't know for sure whether or not he knew. It looks like he probably did know. He was originally outside, like was in the release, had gone back into a building, and when he came out, he had something in his pocket. So it seems like he had gotten his gun ready. He was then holding his phone in the other hand. He had originally been holding his phone in his right hand before he went in the building. And when he went, he walked straight towards the deputies as they walked towards him. And as soon as Scott Stone put his arms around him and said police, he immediately shot. So it looks as if he may have known.
I can also add to that, if you saw earlier when they were following him in the stolen car some time before, he was doing burn moves. Burn moves, when you're doing illegal activity, you're trying to determine if you're being followed by police. It could be that you take 3 right turns and see if the car behind you does 3 right turns. Quite frankly, it could be that you blow through a red light and see if the car behind you goes through a red light. So it showed a certain amount of paranoia on his part, a certain amount of wondering if people are following him. At the same time, on his phone, he did have an app that could pick up police scanners. He was not using it at the time of this incident, but we can see that he had used it in the past. So he is someone that has been concerned about being followed by police before, would have been in a position that he was looking for them. If you note in our report, we noted he was seen smoking in the car. Later it was determined to be methamphetamine. That can add to somebody's paranoia in terms of as he watches people out in the parking lot.
Did pressure from the Villanueva family make you guys want to release this at this time, or was it just a matter of time anyway?
I'll tell you that there are, I do want to thank a lot of people who've been involved in this situation. We have what's called the DFIT team, which is a combined team that came out that night to start the investigation. These things do take time. The Colorado Springs Police Department was the lead agency. It was Detective Cruz Rogers who was their lead detective, and she's done a marvelous job. But quite frankly, there have been a lot of interviews done in this case, so we had to get through all those interviews. There's been a lot of testing. The Metro Crime Lab had to do DNA on all these objects so that we could determine whose DNA was on what object. We had to go through ballistics. They have a fabulous ballistics group over there. They did a great job in doing that. So sometimes we want to arrive at the right decision. We want to make sure when we come out in the public and tell them what the decision is that we are accurate on that. And so a lot of this was strictly getting all of that lined up, getting all the reports, being able to review it, doing up any follow-up interviews we want to do. And I got to tell you, I think that everybody's done a marvelous job in this case. The timing of it was not involved with anything other than that. I understand Mr. Villanueva was getting very antsy, and I can understand that. I wish we could have come faster with this. We always like to. The police officers also are all under the same anguish until this comes out. Nobody is talking to the officers involved who actually did the shooting. They are not allowed to see reports. They're not allowed to know what's going on, so they've sort of been on pins and needles, if you will, also waiting and very anxious to see what any decisions were made in this case.
In terms of the medical treatment for the officers in Thomas Villanueva, there were reports that Thomas Villanueva was actually left for quite a few minutes before another ambulance came for him, that all the other officers and the deputies were taken to the hospital. Is there any truth to that? Is there any timeline in terms of when they were able to get medical attention, all of them?
I probably should ask, are you picking up his questions when we're going through this? Do I need to repeat questions for the media? No. I will tell you again, that one I am going to come back to. Our role in this is to review whether the officers were justified in their shooting. So we review different reports, but things that happened after the event are not things that were within our purview of what we are reviewing in this case. So we are not the ones who would be in the position to answer the question you have asked. Our role, again, is looking at were the officers justified when they did the shooting in this case.
Dan,
Yes.
some of the officers you can see in the map are further away than Thomas Villanueva, and as I'm sure you know, Thomas has said that he neither saw any signs that the people approaching Zetina were law enforcement, and he never heard them say police or identify themselves. Other witnesses have said the same. Your report does not address that. Can you address that now?
Sure, our report does. The report actually indicates that the first time they identify themselves as police is at the moment they are doing the bear hug to arrest Mr. Zetina. They have not announced themselves as police at all up to that point, nor do they have any insignia on them that are identifying them as officers, nor are they displaying any badges. So the first time that they announce themselves as police is as they are putting the bear hug on Mr. Zetina and making the arrest.
So are you saying that Thomas Villanueva and the other witnesses that have said they neither saw or heard anything, that they're mistaken?
Never saw, well, certainly up to that point, people are observing and whether they could identify police officers. They're undercover. They have nothing identifying them. They're trying not to be seen in any way. Up until the point when he does the bear hug, they do not announce who they are. After that point, you do find different witnesses have different memories. They could be at different positions. They could be inside, outside. Different people hear different things. Quite frankly, we found the same thing with the officers. Once the bear hug is down, as we interviewed the different officers, you get different perspectives, different views. Some saw a struggle with the gun itself. Some just saw a general struggle. Some saw, you do get different witnesses hearing or seeing different things.
And the officers did not have visible insignia, is that what you said?
I did. I said the officers did not have visible insignia at the time they made the arrest.
Question, Mr. May. I listened back to Sheriff Elder's press conference that night. He also said that they were wearing, protective gear. Were they wearing protective gear?
I don't know about the protective gear.
They were wearing protective gear. It was underneath their plain clothes, as were their badges that were underneath their clothes.
And that would include a bulletproof vest?
Yes.
And it also, the report also said that they were not wearing body cameras at the time. Is that because they were undercover, or I conflict with those, or what was the reason for that?
That would be a question for the agency on why they did not have the body-worn cameras. We know that this unit did not have body-worn cameras. I know typically at the sheriff's office and I believe the police department, they issue them to patrol officers. Most of these involved were detectives, and so they do issue them to patrol officers because they're most used. Detectives usually coming out on the scene after the fact, and the body-worn is not necessary. But that's a question to ask the agencies on when they do that. I do know that Micah Flick, for instance, was a detective, and so was not issued a body-worn camera. But you have this particular unit is State Patrol, who do not issue body-worns to any of their people, CHPD and EPSO, who do have body-worn cameras, but not to everybody in the department.
So this concludes your investigation, yes?
This concludes our investigation because, again, remember, there is nobody being charged in this situation. The suspect is dead. So our focus is very narrow on whether the officers were justified in returning fire.
Are you aware of any other investigations that are underway of this incident?
I am not.
None?
I am not.
You're not aware?
Dan, sorry, I'm counting 10 officers up there.
That's correct.
Is it correct that none of them saw Thomas Villanueva approaching or around the scene? None of the 10?
So at the time that they made the decision to make the arrest, none of them had seen them. There are officers that in their interviews did see an unknown person pretty much as Scott Stone and Micah Flick are coming very close to Manuel Zetina. They make various statements such as, where did that guy come from? Or I could tell that he didn't have anything to do with this. So that would be the first time the reports indicate that they saw him.
So he walked all the way from the east side of the parking lot because reports are that he was getting food from that east side from a Mexican restaurant right across the street. Walked all the way west across the parking lot, wasn't seen or at least noticed by any officers.
Yeah, and all I can tell you is what they said in their interviews, which is what I told you, and Thomas Villanueva did indicate that he went east across the interview, and across the parking lot, sorry. And some of the officers, when they first see him, he is over in this area somewhere, as Scott Stone and Micah Flick are very close to the suspect.
And just so we make it clear, when Deputy White says he thinks it's a good time to make the arrest, that's relayed to the sergeant, and the sergeant agrees. As they make that decision and start to execute the arrest itself, nobody has seen Mr. Villanueva according to all of their interviews. Prior to the arrest, prior to that first touch or bear hug, some of the officers do see him in the area for the first time. So from the time they make the decision to make the arrest, everybody reports they had not seen him, but prior to any shots or prior to the arrest, he has been seen by at least 2 officers at that point.
Dan, are you able to touch on why it took so long to return fire, why Zetina wasn't shot more quickly by officers?
Again, if you, in our report, and I know it was just given out to you, we believe that Mr. Zetina shot everybody before a single officer returned fire. But keep in mind, this happens in a matter of seconds. This is very quick once it starts. From the time the first bear hug to the final shot, I've had people estimate it could have been as short as 10 seconds. That wouldn't surprise me. It certainly would surprise me if it's over 30 seconds. I'd be actually surprised if it got out to 30 seconds. So the sequencing is very quick. I will say that you can see that some of the officers, at least one of the officers said, as they're looking at this, you've got 2 officers and the suspect all together. And they did not want to take a shot where they were not sure who they may be hitting. So that is why, for instance, Trey White is running up and literally putting his gun almost right on him when he shoots him, because he wants to make sure when he shoots the suspect, he's not shooting one of his fellow officers. So part of it is, yes, Mr. Zetina doesn't really care who he shoots, he's just firing. The officers are actually telling us that they are not only judging what's happening here, but judging where the apartment building is. So they are concerned about shooting others, and so it takes them longer to return fire. But When I say longer to return fire, this is done in seconds. They are moving very quickly. So that is why he is able to fire as he wants, and they're trying not to shoot the person they don't intend to stop and kill.
I dislike using this word, but do you feel like that for the Flick family, for the Villanueva family, for the community, that this offers a little bit more closure?
You know, you'll have to ask each one of those. This is a tragedy for our entire community. As I said in the beginning, you know, the hearts of this entire community go out to the Villanueva family, Thomas, his mom, his dad. This has affected them horribly. I can't tell you that this is going to give closure. He is, unfortunately, you know, he's paralyzed, he's suffering. It's just horrible, the tragedy that happened to him. He's an innocent man just standing there. Nobody ever wanted to see this happen. You know, it's just horrible. So I can't tell you that it's going to close things for them. I think for the, you know, for Micah's family, I think there's a certain amount of closure. They are more in law enforcement, if you will. I think they understand more that. You know, we all know, unfortunately, law enforcement's a dangerous job. And this is an example of that. You try to take all the precautions you can in the world, but in the end, it's a dangerous job. Excuse me. So I can't tell you whether it's going to give them closure or not. It'll give them some answers. I think that's part of what they'll look at. I think they can understand that maybe more than the Villanueva family, just because they know what it is to be a police officer. This, unfortunately, is one of those dangerous situations that nobody ever wants to see. I apologize.
So you could find no wrongdoing by any of the police officers, that's what it kind of boils down to, right?
Again, what we're reviewing is whether the officers who returned fire, were justified in doing that. And we found that they were absolutely justified in shooting and killing Mr. Zetina. And that was our conclusion in this case. We do not review tactics that are being used. We don't review other things. Ours is a very narrow investigation in terms of what we are looking at.
I'm not sure if this falls under that broader scope that you guys don't address, but, you know, we've listened back to the radio traffic, and it seems
You
like
betcha.
there was a lot of doubt whether they should arrest Zetina at that point or not, and they decide to go in. How much do you think that played a factor in this? Was there doubt in going in? I mean, I know in the report it says, you know, that they didn't realize that Zetina had a firearm until much closer.
Again, we don't judge the tactics of what's going on. We can see by their interviews some of these tactics they've used over and over again. We can see from some of their interviews they actually train on many of these tactics. The bear hug that they used is not something new that they just did at this particular scene. I personally can see that there are 10 officers there. I know that the fugitive units for my law enforcement agencies, when they're going out to arrest property crime felons, work in groups of 2 normally. So you can see here they had 10 different officers at this particular scene for someone that they are trying to arrest for stealing a car. They did not know who this person was at the time that they made the arrest. They did not know that he was armed. At the point that they are actually now approaching and executing their arrest is when Deputy White sees him reaching in, or sees him in his pocket, and is now suspecting that there may be a gun, and that's in our report.